The announcement came in the early hours of a crisp September morning, sending shockwaves through social media, news outlets, and political circles alike. New York University's Stern School of Business had invited Barron Trump, the only son of former President Donald Trump, to deliver the keynote speech at the annual freshman convocation. As a senior at Stern, Barron had largely stayed out of the political limelight, focusing on his studies and personal growth. But this speech would change everything. For weeks, speculation ran wild. What would he say? Would he echo his father's controversial rhetoric or carve out a new identity of his own? Would the audience, comprised of fresh-faced students eager to begin their academic journey, welcome him with open arms or meet him with resistance? The invitation itself was unexpected. Though Barron had excelled academically, ranking among the top students in his class, he had never been particularly vocal in public settings. Unlike his father and older siblings, he had refrained from making political statements, rarely granting interviews or engaging with the media. His Instagram was devoid of controversy, just pictures of him playing soccer, attending classes, and spending time with friends. Yet here he was, about to address thousands of incoming students, faculty, and press from around the world. The significance wasn't lost on anyone. Barron Trump wasn't just any senior student, he was the son of a president who had defined an era of American politics. And now, the world waited with bated breath to hear what he had to say. As the day of the speech approached, New York City buzzed with anticipation. News outlets from CNN to Fox News covered the event relentlessly, speculating about the contents of Barron's address. Some commentators believed he would take a strong political stance, perhaps endorsing his father's legacy or positioning himself for a future in politics. Others predicted a simple, generic speech about perseverance and ambition. Among the students, reactions were mixed. Some were excited, eager to hear from one of the most famous names in the country. Others were skeptical, viewing him as a product of privilege with little to offer. A handful of activist groups even threatened to protest, believing that Barron's presence on stage was a tacit endorsement of his father's policies. But Barron remained silent. No social media posts. No leaked hints about his speech. No interviews. He went about his days as usual, attending his final year classes and preparing for what would undoubtedly be the most important moment of his life. As the day of the speech approached, New York City buzzed with anticipation. News outlets from CNN to Fox News covered the event relentlessly, speculating about the contents of Barron's address. Some commentators believed he would take a strong political stance, perhaps endorsing his father's legacy or positioning himself for a future in politics. Others predicted a simple, generic speech about perseverance and ambition. Among the students, reactions were mixed. Some were excited, eager to hear from one of the most famous names in the country. Others were skeptical, viewing him as a product of privilege with little to offer. A handful of activist groups even threatened to protest, believing that Barron's presence on stage was a tacit endorsement of his father's policies. But Barron remained silent. No social media posts. No leaked hints about his speech. No interviews. He went about his days as usual, attending his final year classes and preparing for what would undoubtedly be the most important moment of his life. While much of the media's attention was on Barron, the Trump family also found itself at the center of speculation. Donald Trump, now in his 80s, had expressed pride in his son's academic achievements but remained cryptic about the speech. Some insiders suggested that the former president wanted Barron to use the platform to rally young conservatives, while others claimed he encouraged his son to be his own man. Melania Trump, ever the poised and private figure, remained tight-lipped. But those close to her hinted that she had urged Barron to stay away from politics altogether. She had always been protective of her son, shielding him from the harsh glare of the media. Would she be in the audience, supporting him? No one knew for sure. As for the rest of the Trump siblings, Donald Jr., Ivanka, Eric, and Tiffany, none had publicly commented on Barron's upcoming speech. Some viewed this as a sign of silent support, while others speculated that there were tensions within the family. The stage was set. The world was watching. And on the evening of September 10, 2025, Barron Trump walked onto the stage at Stern's Grand Auditorium, ready to deliver the speech that would either define or destroy his public image forever. The atmosphere inside the Stern Auditorium was electric. Rows upon rows of students, faculty members, and media personnel filled every seat, their eyes fixed on the stage. Some were there out of curiosity, others with skepticism, and a select few with outright hostility. But everyone, whether they supported him or not, knew they were witnessing a historic moment. As Barron Trump stepped onto the stage, the crowd erupted into a mixture of cheers and murmurs. Standing at an impressive 6 feet 7 inches, dressed in a tailored navy blue suit, he looked every bit the composed young leader. But as he approached the podium, gripping the edges for support, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. Then, with a deep breath, he began. "Good evening, everyone." His voice was calm, clear, and deep, commanding attention without the need for theatrics. "It's an honor to stand before you today, not just as a senior at this incredible institution, but as someone who, like all of you, has been on a journey of self-discovery." The audience listened intently. There were no political slogans, no grandstanding. Just an earnest young man speaking from the heart. "For most of my life, people have assumed they know who I am before I even open my mouth," Barron continued, his eyes scanning the audience. "They see the name Trump and immediately decide whether they admire me, hate me, or don't care at all. And I get it. It's human nature. But here's the thing. I'm not here to talk about my family. I'm here to talk about all of us." A hush fell over the room. This was not the speech they had expected. Some students leaned forward in their seats. Others glanced at each other, surprised. Barron went on to share his personal struggles, something no one had ever heard him do before. "Growing up, I had everything people think they want. Money, security, a famous last name. But do you know what I didn't have?" He paused for effect. "Freedom, not in the way you might think. My life has been watched, analyzed, judged. Every mistake I made, every moment of my childhood, was under a microscope." This was a side of Barron Trump the world had never seen. The media had always portrayed him as the quiet, mysterious figure in the background of political history. But today he was laying bare his truth. "Many of you are coming here with your own burdens. Maybe you feel pressure to live up to expectations. Maybe you're afraid you won't fit in. Maybe you don't even know what you want to do with your life yet." He chuckled softly. "I'll let you in on a secret. I don't have it all figured out either." In the audience, students who had come prepared to protest began putting their signs down. The skeptics started listening instead of waiting for something to criticize. Even the faculty members, many of whom had questioned Stern's decision to invite Barron, began nodding in approval. Then, he hit them with a line that no one would forget. "The world will always try to define you before you even define yourself. But here, in this room, in this school, you get to be whoever you want to be. So my advice? Don't let anyone, not your parents, not society, and definitely not the media, tell you who you are." A wave of applause rippled through the auditorium. Not just polite claps, but real, genuine appreciation. Some students even stood up, nodding in agreement. Barron Trump was no longer just the son of a former president. In that moment, he became a voice for an entire generation. Back at the Trump family estate in Mar-a-Lago, Donald Trump sat in his study watching the speech unfold on a large television screen. His expression was unreadable. He had expected his son to make headlines, but this was something different. Melania, seated beside him, allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. "He's his own man," she whispered. Meanwhile, in New York, Ivanka, Eric, and Don Jr. sat together, watching the broadcast in silence. It was a rare moment where politics didn't matter, only pride in their youngest brother's boldness. And as the cameras panned across the audience at Stern, capturing students rising to their feet, clapping louder and louder, the world realized that this speech wasn't just inspiring freshmen. It was changing the way people saw Barron Trump forever. As the applause thundered through the auditorium, Barron Trump took a steady breath. He hadn't expected such an overwhelming response, not from this audience. He had prepared for skepticism, for eye rolls, maybe even for a few students walking out. But this was something different. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just Donald Trump's son. He was simply Barron. "Thank you," he said, his deep voice cutting through the cheers. "I appreciate that. But let's be honest, words are easy. What really matters is what we do next." The audience quieted down. It was clear that this wasn't just going to be a motivational speech filled with vague encouragements. Barron was building towards something bigger. "I want to tell you a quick story," Barron continued, resting his hands on the podium. "When I first arrived at Stern, I didn't know where I belonged. People either wanted to be my best friend because of my last name, or they kept their distance, assuming I was something I wasn't. I felt stuck. But one day, a professor, one of the toughest at the school, told me something that changed my entire perspective. Barron took a step forward, looking straight into the crowd. He said, "You have two choices. You can let people's expectations control you, or you can prove them all wrong." A murmur of recognition spread through the audience. Every student in that room had, at some point, felt boxed in by expectations, whether it was pressure from family, society, or even self-doubt. Barron continued, his tone becoming more urgent. "We live in a world where people are quick to judge, quick to label, quick to decide who we are before we even get a chance to show them. And that's exactly why I challenge each and every one of you today to prove them wrong." A wave of cheers erupted again, but this time there was more than just excitement. There was fire, passion. "Be the person they don't expect you to be," Barron said, his voice firm. "If they think you're too quiet, speak up. If they think you're not smart enough, outwork them. If they think you'll fail, prove them wrong so completely that they'll never doubt you again." At that moment, social media exploded. Clips of Barron's speech flooded Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram. Hashtags like #ProveThemWrong and #Barron Trump speech began trending worldwide. Some students were live streaming the event while news outlets scrambled to get the footage online as quickly as possible. For years, Barron had been the most elusive member of the Trump family, rarely seen, rarely heard. But now his voice was echoing across the internet, touching people from all walks of life. Even celebrities and politicians who had previously distanced themselves from the Trump name couldn't ignore what was happening. "Regardless of politics, that was one hell of a speech," tweeted a well-known late-night show host. "Barron Trump just dropped the most inspiring words I've heard in years." "Respect," posted an NBA star. But it wasn't just famous figures taking notice. Young people everywhere, whether they were students, entrepreneurs, or just struggling to find their place in the world, felt something shift. Barron's words weren't about politics. They were about breaking free from expectations and defining yourself on your own terms. And the world was listening. Back at the Trump estate, Donald Trump remained glued to the screen. He hadn't moved for the past 20 minutes. Melania sat beside him, her face unreadable. But those who knew her well could see the subtle pride in her eyes. Ivanka and Don Jr. exchanged glances as the speech continued playing on live TV. "He's different from the rest of us," Ivanka finally said. Don Jr. exhaled. "Yeah, and that might not be a bad thing." Meanwhile, in Washington, former President Joe Biden's staff had received an urgent request from the media for a comment. The same was happening in political offices across the country. Everyone wanted to know the same thing. What did the speech mean for the future? The morning after Barron Trump's speech, the world was still reeling. Every major news outlet, CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, had the same headline. Barron Trump's speech at NYU Stern stuns the world, a new voice rises. Social media had turned him into an overnight sensation. Some hailed him as a fresh, independent thinker, a young leader who had finally stepped out of his father's shadow. Others were skeptical, wondering if this was a carefully orchestrated moment leading to something bigger. And of course, there were critics, those who dismissed the speech as empty rhetoric or accused him of trying to rebrand the Trump legacy. But the undeniable fact was this: Barron Trump had the world's attention. The political world was in chaos. In Washington, prominent Democrats and Republicans scrambled to understand what had just happened. Was this speech the beginning of a new Trump entering the political arena? Or was Barron genuinely uninterested in following in his father's footsteps? At a press briefing, a White House spokesperson was asked point-blank, "Does President Biden have any comments on Barron Trump's speech?" The spokesperson hesitated for a moment before replying carefully, "The president believes that young people using their voice for positive change is always a good thing." That wasn't exactly an endorsement, but it wasn't criticism either. It was clear that even Biden's team wasn't sure how to approach the situation. Meanwhile, conservative commentators on Fox News and Newsmax were calling Barron's speech a breath of fresh air and speculating that he could be the future of the Republican Party. Liberal pundits were more cautious. On MSNBC, a political analyst noted, "We should be careful not to rush into conclusions. Barron Trump may have given an inspiring speech, but does this mean he's distancing himself from his father's legacy? Or is he just repackaging it?" And then, late that evening, Donald Trump himself broke his silence. On Truth Social, he posted, "Very proud of my son Barron. A very intelligent young man with a great future ahead. Tremendous speech." It was a short message, but it set off another media firestorm. Did this mean Donald Trump approved of his son's independence? Or was he hoping to claim credit for Barron's success? And perhaps the biggest question of all, was this speech just a one-time moment, or was Barron Trump about to become a major public figure? Meanwhile, at NYU Stern, Barron could barely walk through campus without being approached. Reporters camped outside lecture halls, hoping to get a statement. Students who had barely acknowledged him before were now eager to shake his hand, take pictures, or just tell him how much the speech meant to them. One student, a freshman named Sophia Ramirez, was still buzzing with excitement. "I came in expecting some rich kid to talk down to us," she admitted in a viral TikTok. But he was real. He wasn't trying to be his dad. He wasn't trying to be anyone but himself. Others were more skeptical. "It was a great speech, sure," said another student in an interview. "But let's see what he actually does next." Words are easy. Barron, however, had no interest in basking in the attention. He attended his classes as usual, refused all interview requests, and didn't post anything on social media. It was as if he wanted the world to focus on his message, not on him. But the world wasn't letting go that easily. With his speech now seen by millions, speculation about Barron's future was running wild. Would he enter politics? Start a business empire? Go completely off the grid? Some of his professors at NYU Stern believed he had a sharp business mind and could easily follow in his father's footsteps as an entrepreneur. Others thought he might take an entirely different path, perhaps even something in academia or philanthropy. Political strategists were already floating wild ideas. "Imagine a 2040 Barron Trump presidential run," one political columnist wrote. "It sounds crazy now, but so did a Donald Trump presidency in 2015. But for Barron, none of that mattered right now. He had said what he needed to say. And whether people loved him or hated him, one thing was certain. He was no longer just a name. He was a force to be reckoned with. As the days turned into weeks, the frenzy surrounding Barron Trump's speech refused to die down. What had started as a simple keynote address at NYU Stern had turned into a global conversation about identity, expectations, and the next generation of leadership. Journalists, analysts, and political strategists continued to speculate. Was this Barron's way of signaling his entry into the public sphere? Or was it simply a personal reflection that happened to resonate with millions? But Barron himself remained silent. No interviews. No social media posts. No follow-up speeches. And that silence only made the world even more curious. For decades, the Trump family had been known for their brashness, their willingness to engage in public battles, and their mastery of media spectacle. But Barron was different. He wasn't interested in playing the game his father had mastered. He didn't fire back at critics. He didn't boast about his newfound fame. He simply continued living his life, attending his classes, studying for exams, and occasionally grabbing a coffee with friends. This quiet confidence, this refusal to capitalize on the moment, made him even more intriguing. "This isn't just another Trump," one political strategist said on a news segment. "This is something else entirely. And that makes him even more unpredictable." Perhaps the most surprising fallout from Barron's speech was how it began to change people's perceptions, not just of him, but of the Trump name itself. For years, the Trump family had been one of the most polarizing in American history. To their supporters, they were strong, unapologetic leaders. To their critics, they represented division and controversy. But Barron's speech had managed to cut through those rigid perceptions. "I've never been a fan of the Trumps," admitted one NYU professor in a viral op-ed, "but if Barron is the future of that name, maybe, just maybe, I've been too quick to judge." For the first time in years, a member of the Trump family was being viewed in a new light, not as a political figure, not as a brand, but as an individual. And that in itself was groundbreaking. Amid all the speculation, one of the most anticipated moments happened far away from cameras and microphones inside the Trump estate at Mar-a-Lago. Barron had returned home for the weekend and his father was waiting for him in his study. The moment Barron stepped in, Donald Trump gestured toward the large leather chair across from him. "Take a seat, kid." Barron did. For a moment, there was silence. Then Donald Trump leaned forward, clasping his hands together. "You shocked a lot of people." Barron met his father's gaze. "I wasn't trying to." Donald Trump smirked. "That's why it worked." Another pause. Then, in a rare moment of candor, the former president said something that caught Barron off guard. "I don't know if you realize it yet, but you've got something special." He leaned back. "People listen to you. Not because of me, not because of our name, but because of you. That's rare." Barron nodded slowly but didn't respond. Donald Trump studied his son for a long moment before finally asking the question that had been on everyone's mind. "So, what's next for you?" Barron exhaled, glancing out the window for a moment. Then he turned back to his father. "I don't know yet." And for once, Donald Trump didn't push for an answer. Instead, he simply nodded. "Take your time. As Barron returned to NYU the next week, he carried with him the weight of a new reality. He had a voice. People were listening. And whether he liked it or not, he was now a public figure in his own right. But he wasn't in a rush. He had no desire to jump into politics, no plans to launch a company, no immediate goals beyond finishing his final year at Stern. For now, he would focus on what mattered most, living life on his own terms. Because, as he had told the freshmen in his speech, the world would always try to define him before he even had the chance to define himself. But now finally, he had taken control of his own story. And the world would just have to wait and see what came next.